On the stoop of a Hyde Park brownstone, a 55-year-old nurse unwraps a White Castle slider and hears the sound that will change her life. A voice, her sister's, laughing on the other end of a landline. "Girl, run that joint account real quick. Keisha won't know till the mortgage bounces." And just like that, everything she's worked for, her overtime savings, her daughter's college dream, is gone. But this isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about rebirth, because from that betrayal, something sacred will grow. A movement born from hurt, healed by sisterhood, where every brunch table becomes a battlefield, and every saved dollar becomes a prayer. They'll call it Sista Saver Sundays. And by the time it's over, 12 cities will echo her name, because sometimes the hardest heartbreak becomes the holiest calling. Hyde Park, Chicago. Late afternoon. The kind of light that settles gently on the brownstones. Not golden, not gray, just soft. Like forgiveness that hasn't quite been offered yet. Keisha Washington sat on the front stoop of her 3-story walk-up, the cool stone pressing through her scrubs. She had just finished another 12-hour shift at Mercy South, and her body felt like a note stretched too tight on a cello, humming but ready to snap. In her left hand, a small White Castle slider. In her right, the cordless landline phone she'd carried outside for a moment of quiet. She wanted to listen to the city breathe. The low hum of buses, the distant rattle of the L, the soft laughter of college students walking home from campus. Then she heard her sister's voice. "Girl, run that joint card real quick. The $130,000 one. Keisha won't know till the mortgage bounces." It was laughter on the other end, a careless, cruel kind. For a second, Keisha thought she'd misheard. The White Castle burger slipped from her hand and landed in its crinkled wrapper like a tiny folded flag at a funeral. The phone was still pressed to her ear. She didn't speak. She didn't breathe. Her sister Patrice kept talking, loud, certain, unguarded. Talking about how she'd earned it, how Keisha wouldn't miss it anyway, and how family looked out for each other, even if it meant bending the rules. It was the word family that broke something in her. That $130,000 wasn't just money. It was the weight of 2 years of double shifts and bleary-eyed overtime, the smell of antiseptic and coffee clinging to her like armor. It was the dream of watching her only daughter, Nia, step onto the campus of Spelman College, debt-free, unburdened, radiant in possibility. And now it was gone. Keisha hung up before the call could finish. She didn't slam the phone. She just placed it on the step beside her, as if setting down a burden that had grown too heavy to carry another inch. For a while she sat still. The city moved around her. Sirens in the distance, wind brushing against old trees, someone's music spilling faintly from an open window. She felt all of it and none of it. Her eyes drifted up to the brickwork of the neighboring buildings. Steady, unshaken, as if to say, "We've seen storms before." Honey. That night, she changed every pin, every password, every quiet promise she'd ever made to let it slide. By midnight, she had filed a police report. By dawn, she was back at the hospital, tending to a teenager with a gunshot wound. The rhythm of her work, the beeps, the cries, the whispered prayers, grounded her in a strange way. Life and death had rules, boundaries, structure. Family, she was learning, did not. Keisha had always been the dependable one. The sister who paid the light bill when Mama's arthritis flared. The aunt who remembered birthdays when everyone else forgot. The one who made enough to be the emergency contact and the safety net rolled into one. But that Sunday morning, she woke up different. Something inside her had shifted, a quiet steel threading through her bones. She poured her coffee, black and strong, then opened her worn notebook. the one she used for grocery lists and sermon notes. On the first blank page, she wrote in small, neat letters, "Sista Saver Sundays." The idea came not from revenge, but from exhaustion. Keisha realized that women like her, nurses, teachers, caregivers, single mothers, aunties, the women who held everything together, had nowhere to learn how to protect what they'd earned. They gave everything and then some, and called it love. She decided it was time to call it wisdom instead. The first Sista Saver Sunday began in her church basement, with 6 women, 2 folding tables, a crock pot of collard greens, and Keisha's spiral notebook. They shared stories about bounced checks, shared credit cards, men who borrowed just until payday, and dreams deferred for someone else's emergencies. There were no PowerPoints, no accountants, just women, food, and truth. Keisha didn't preach. She guided. She told them what she'd learned from losing everything and starting again. About keeping records, about boundaries, about the holiness of saying no without guilt. She remembered Patrice's laughter that day on the phone and turned it into a quiet vow. 2 years later, the basement could no longer hold the crowd. Word had spread. There were Sista Saver Sundays in 12 cities, from Detroit to Dallas, all born from that Hyde Park stoop and a broken moment of betrayal. The media came calling. Ebony ran a story. The Tribune sent a photographer. Keisha didn't smile for the camera. She smiled for the women standing behind her, aprons dusted with flour, notebooks full of new beginnings. And every month, Patrice came to help. She didn't come as a sister anymore. She came as a dishwasher. It wasn't Keisha's idea. It was Patrice's. She'd shown up one Sunday, head down, asking to help earn back trust one plate at a time. At first, Keisha couldn't look her in the eye, but forgiveness, like the sunrise, doesn't ask for permission. It just comes, slow and certain. There were days when the scent of dish soap and fried chicken would bring back the ache of that night. The phone call, the empty account, the White Castle wrapper on the stoop. But Keisha would glance over at Patrice, sleeves rolled, working in silence, and feel something softer rise inside her. Not pity, not anger, just the quiet understanding that healing sometimes looks like ordinary work done with a humbled heart. That fall, Nia received her acceptance letter from Spellman. Paid in full. The morning Keisha dropped her off at the dorm, Atlanta sunlight pouring through the window, she stood a long time before saying goodbye. Nia hugged her mother tight and whispered, "You didn't just send me here. Mama, you built a way." Keisha smiled, not the tired smile of survival, but the deep, peaceful one of a woman who had finally come home to herself. As she drove back north, she thought about that day on the stoop, how a broken phone line had opened a new chapter in her life. She thought about all the Sundays to come, all the women she hadn't met yet, sitting somewhere with their own White Castle wrappers and unpaid dreams. And she knew the story wasn't over. It had only just begun. Did you enjoy it? Then give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. You can also support me directly with a super thanks. Every movement that ever mattered started in a room too small to hold its purpose. Keisha's started in the basement of Greater Emmanuel Baptist Church, a place that smelled of lemon oil, hope, and yesterday's coffee. The walls were painted the color of patience, chipped cream, patched with new coats that never quite matched, folding chairs lined up like prayer requests, and the sound of gospel records drifted from an old turntable, skipping every now and then like an old friend clearing her throat before giving advice. That first Sunday, Keisha wasn't sure anyone would come. She'd baked sweet cornbread the night before, the kind Mama used to make. Thick, golden, and almost too sweet. She wanted something that felt like comfort, because money talk, she knew, could feel like confession. At 1 p.m., 6 women arrived. They came quietly: nurses, teachers, a daycare owner, a home health aide, each one wearing the tired kind of pride that working women wear when they've been strong too long. They didn't know exactly what they were walking into, but they knew the woman who'd invited them. Keisha Washington had always been the one with the calm hands, the level eyes, and the kind of steady that made others feel safe to tremble. She started the meeting not with a speech, but a question. What would it look like, she said, if we started treating our money the way we treat our love? Careful, generous, but protected? For a moment, no one answered. You could hear the hum of the old refrigerator in the corner, the squeak of someone's chair. Then one of the women, Dolores, a bus driver with arthritis in both knees, let out a shaky laugh. I guess it'd look like we finally learned not to let people borrow it just 'cause they crying, she said. The room burst into laughter. Real, honest, unguarded. That laughter was the first brick in something bigger than Keisha had words for. Week after week, more women came. They brought casseroles, notebooks, receipts, and regrets. They sat in that basement and talked about the things nobody wanted to say out loud. The cousin who never paid back a temporary loan, the man who asked for help with rent, but moved out before the first of the month, the adult son still on his mama's credit card. Keisha didn't shame anyone. She listened. Then she started teaching, not like a banker, but like a healer. She told them how to open an account in their own name, how to check their credit, how to make a budget that didn't just pay bills but protected dreams. She called it financial self-defense. They called it the basement gospel. The church started to notice. By spring, Deacon Harris asked if the meetings could move upstairs into the fellowship hall. Y'all making the basement too holy to store mops, he joked. But Keisha kept it there a while longer. There was something sacred about being beneath it all, about roots before branches. One Sunday after the meeting ended and everyone had gone home, she stayed behind to clean up. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the vending machine. She ran her hand along the tables, tracing crumbs and stories. She felt the presence of something bigger than her, not just faith, but purpose. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Ms. Washington, a woman's voice said, professional but kind. This is Janine from the Chicago Defender. We heard about your workshops. Do you have a moment to talk about what inspired you? Keisha almost laughed. What inspired me? A stolen dream, a broken line, a sandwich she never finished. But instead, she said softly, Sure, baby. I got a moment. The article ran the following month. Headline: The Nurse Who Heals Finances and Hearts in Hyde Park. It wasn't flashy, but it resonated. By that summer, Keisha's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Community centers, YWCAs, even a librarian from Milwaukee wanted to host Sista Saver Sundays. Keisha didn't have a plan for expansion, just a notebook filled with handwritten lessons and recipes for what she called food that makes truth easier to swallow. But she learned fast. She took night classes in nonprofit management, built a website with the help of Nia's classmate, and trademarked the name Sista Saver TM. She laughed when she filled out the paperwork, the kind of laugh that's half disbelief, half praise. Look at God, she whispered to herself, signing her name. Still, growth wasn't easy. There were critics, people who said she was getting too big, that she should leave money matters to the men, or that she was turning the church into a business. She heard it all, smiled politely, and kept moving. Because Keisha had learned something powerful on that stoop 2 years before. When you stop asking for permission to rise, somebody will always call it rebellion. Her mother's old saying rang. In her mind, "Baby, if you wait for folks to clap before you do good, you gon' grow old waiting." So she didn't wait. She kept feeding, teaching, and saving, one Sunday at a time. Then came the day Patrice showed up. It was the first Sunday of fall. The air had that familiar bite, apple sweet and cool. The trees lining 53rd Street had begun to rust, the leaves curling into little paper prayers. Keisha was setting up the folding tables when she heard footsteps on the stairs. When she turned, her breath caught. Patrice stood there, holding a stack of clean dish towels. "Hey, sis," she said quietly. "Pastor told me you might need an extra pair of hands." Keisha didn't answer. She looked at her sister. The same eyes, same cheekbones, but worn now, humbled. There was no jewelry, no perfume, no bravado. Just a woman who'd fallen and didn't know if she could stand up again. They stood there a long moment, both waiting for the other to break the silence. Then Keisha pointed toward the sink. "You can start with the plates," she said softly. That was all. But for Patrice, it was enough. That afternoon, as Patrice washed dishes in the back and the women shared their stories up front, Keisha felt something shift again, like the room itself had exhaled. Pain had come full circle, returning not as bitterness, but as service. When the workshop ended, Patrice stayed behind. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't make excuses. She just kept scrubbing. And Keisha, watching her through the kitchen doorway, thought about how healing doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through the sound of running water and the clink of plates, through humility, through work, through showing up again and again. By evening, they were the last two left. The sun had dipped low, streaking the basement window with amber light. Patrice turned off the faucet and said, almost to herself, "I'm trying, Keisha." "I know," Keisha replied, her voice steady but kind. "We both are." That night, Keisha wrote in her notebook again, a new phrase beneath the original heading, "Grace is a kind of currency too." She closed the book, turned off the light, and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, not for money, but for meaning. Because sometimes the richest thing a woman can own is a story that didn't destroy her. Success doesn't always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it comes wearing the same old shoes, walking the same familiar blocks, quietly rearranging the way you see yourself. By the third year of Sista Savor Sundays, Keisha's world had changed in ways she hadn't planned for. The church basement had given birth to 12 chapters across the country. Local news had turned into national features. She'd been invited to speak at a women's finance summit in D.C., her travel covered, her name printed on programs beside people she'd only ever seen on television. But deep down, she still felt like that nurse on the stoop, the one clutching a cold burger and a phone full of betrayal. You can build an empire from pain, she thought, but you'll always hear the echo of where it started. The morning before her DC trip, Keisha stopped by the church to drop off some supplies. The fellowship hall smelled of fresh paint, the basement of bleach and Sunday leftovers. Patrice was already there, humming softly as she stacked plates. It had been a year since Patrice's quiet return, and her presence had settled into the rhythm of the work. Dependable, gentle, almost invisible. She didn't ask for special treatment. She just showed up, week after week, her hands raw from the dishwater, her spirit softened by repentance. Keisha noticed the change, though she rarely said it out loud. Forgiveness, she'd learned, wasn't a single act. It was a rhythm. "Morning, sis," Patrice said without looking up. "Morning," Keisha replied, setting a box on the counter. They worked side by side, the silence between them no longer heavy, just familiar. Then Patrice spoke, her voice careful. "Heard you're flying out tomorrow. Big speech, huh?" Keisha nodded. "Yeah, suppose it is. Bet Mama would have been proud." Keisha smiled faintly, a tear brushing her voice. "She would have been more surprised I didn't quit my job first." They both laughed, softly, like women who'd lost too much time but were learning to live again in the small, safe spaces of shared memory. That evening, Keisha sat by her window, suitcase half packed. Outside, Chicago was wrapped in its usual mix of sirens and promise. She stared at the skyline, the Sears Tower blinking steady, a heartbeat of light against the dark. Her phone buzzed again. Another number she didn't know. She hesitated, then answered. "Ms. Washington, this is Clarissa from Aventura Media. We handle partnerships for national brands with social impact initiatives. We've been following your story, and we'd love to talk about a collaboration." Keisha frowned slightly. "Collaboration how?" "Well," Clarissa continued smoothly, "we're offering a funding grant. $100,000 to expand Sista Saver nationally. We'd handle publicity, branding, and social media engagement. You'd be the face of the campaign, from basement to brilliance." Sound familiar? Keisha's chest tightened. Money like that could change everything. More workshops, scholarships, outreach, but something in the woman's tone made her uneasy. "Let me think on it," Keisha said politely. After she hung up, she sat in the quiet for a long while, letting the idea roll through her mind. Money was power, yes, but power without purpose was just another kind of trap. She knew how easy it was to lose control of what you built, just like you could lose control of what you love. 2 days later, in DC, Keisha stood before a ballroom full of women. The stage lights were soft, but the energy in the room was alive. She spoke not from notes, but from truth about sisterhood, betrayal, and rebuilding from nothing. Her voice trembled once when she said, "Sometimes the people who break us are the same ones who taught us how to heal." When she finished, the crowd rose to their feet. She didn't cry, not there. But when she returned to her hotel room, she sat on the edge of the bed, removed her shoes, and wept. Not from sadness, but from awe. When she flew home, she found Patrice waiting in the kitchen, humming over a pot of greens. The smell was rich, full of memory. "How was it?" Patrice asked. "Beautiful," Keisha said softly. "And big." "Too big for what I planned." Patrice looked up, curious. "You thinking of expanding?" Keisha leaned against the counter, arms folded. "A media company reached out. Big grant. National rollout. But I don't know if that's the way this story's supposed to grow." Patrice stirred the pot slowly. "You worried they'll take it from you?" Keisha met her sister's eyes. "No, I'm worried I'll give it away too easily." The silence that followed was long, but kind. Finally, Patrice said, "You taught me something these last 2 years, Keisha. You said every dollar should have a job and a boundary. Maybe the same goes for dreams." Keisha smiled. It was a small truth, but it landed deep. A week later, she met with Clarissa at a downtown cafe. All marble tables and glass windows overlooking the city. Clarissa was polished, young, persuasive. She laid out the contract. Big numbers, national exposure, promises of empowerment initiatives. But the fine print told another story. They wanted creative control, ownership of the Sista Saver brand, and a percentage of every city's profits. Keisha's throat tightened as she read. She looked up slowly. "So you want the name?" she said, voice steady. The message, the soul, all of it. Clarissa smiled, rehearsed and sweet. "We want to help it reach the world, Ms. Washington." Keisha folded the papers carefully, slid them back across the table, and said in a voice that was soft but unshakable, "Baby, the world can wait. My women can't." She stood, left a tip for her coffee, and walked out. The cold Chicago air met her like an old friend. It bit her cheeks and cleared her head. For the first time in years, she felt untouchable, not because she had money, but because she finally knew what she wouldn't sell. That night, she called Nia in Atlanta. Her daughter's voice came through, warm and bright. "Mama, you sound lighter," Nia said. Keisha laughed. "Maybe I am. Maybe forgiveness takes weight off places you didn't even know were tired." They talked about school, love, and the future. Nia told her about a finance club she'd started on campus. "For girls who don't just want jobs, Mama, but freedom." Keisha closed her eyes, smiling. The seed she'd planted was blooming in another field now. Later, as the city quieted, Keisha pulled out her notebook again. She turned to a fresh page and wrote, "The price of forgiveness is honesty, even when it costs you everything else." Then she underlined it twice, because she knew forgiveness wasn't free. It asked something of you, sometimes money, sometimes pride, sometimes the courage to say no when the world finally started saying yes. And that night, under the hum of the old radiator and the faint siren song of Chicago streets, Keisha whispered a prayer for the next chapter. Whatever it would cost, she was ready to pay it. Chicago in spring has a way of pretending it's healed. The wind softens, the trees blush green again, and even the lake, gray for months, remembers how to shimmer. But beneath all that beauty, the city still carries its old stories of struggle, survival, and the quiet women who built the world one shift at a time. Keisha felt that weight every morning as she walked from her brownstone to the bus stop, the same route she'd taken for decades. Though now, neighbors waved at her like she was someone worth noticing. "Miss Sista Saver," they called out sometimes. "Miss Keisha, we saw you on the news." She'd smile, nod, but never linger too long. Fame, she thought, was just another kind of shift. Bright for a moment, then gone when the lights dim. Still, she could feel the city remembering her. The nurse who'd built a movement from a broken heart. And maybe, she thought, she was starting to remember herself, too. The first sign of change came on a Thursday evening. She was at the church going over budgets when Pastor Mills walked in. He was a tall man in his early 60s, kind eyes behind old glasses, the kind of man who never raised his voice unless it was to laugh. "Keisha," he said, leaning against the door frame, "there's someone I want you to meet." Behind him stepped a man she hadn't seen before. Broad shoulders, graying beard, neat denim jacket. He held his cap in his hands like respect was something he'd been raised on. "This here is Reverend Ellis," Pastor Mills said. "He just took over St. Luke's down on Drexel. Used to run a community credit union program in Detroit. Said he's been wanting to meet the lady who's teaching the city how to save its soul." The man chuckled softly. "You make it sound holier than it is, Pastor." "I just teach folks how to stop signing bad loans." Keisha smiled, shaking his hand. "Then we're in the same ministry, Reverend." His grip was firm, warm. And for the first time in a long while, Keisha felt something stir. Not romance, exactly, but curiosity. That small, quiet wondering that wakes up in the heart of a woman who's finally done grieving. Over the next few weeks, their paths kept crossing. He came to one of her sessions, sat in the back, listening with that stillness of a man who pays attention. Afterward, he helped stack chairs, joked with the women, and offered to connect her with folks who could teach financial literacy on a broader scale. She was cautious at first. Collaboration had once cost her dearly. But Ellis was different. He didn't talk in slogans or strategy. He spoke like a man who'd lost some things too. One evening, while locking up the basement, he lingered by the door. "You ever think," he said quietly, "that God hides second chances in plain sight? Maybe in work. Maybe in people?" Keisha looked at him, the light from the hallway brushing his face. "Maybe," she said, "but I don't chase them anymore. If they're meant to find me, they will." He smiled. "Then maybe this one just did." It was the first time in years someone had looked at her that way, not as a symbol or a story, but as a woman. That night, Keisha lay awake, the soft hum of the radiator filling the room. She thought about Ellis, about how his voice carried both faith and weariness, like her own. She wasn't sure what this was becoming, or if she even wanted to name it. All she knew was that it felt gentle. And after so many years of surviving storms, gentleness felt revolutionary. Meanwhile, Hyde Park was shifting around her. A mural went up near the community garden, a painting of her, surrounded by women holding notebooks and smiling. The caption read, "We save ourselves." She didn't know who painted it, but every time she passed it, she felt her throat tighten. Not out of pride, but awe, that someone had seen her story and turned it into color. The city had started to remember her, but more importantly, it had started to remember itself, its women, its resilience, its beauty born from struggle. That summer, the first official Sista Savor Expo was held downtown. 12 chapters came together under one roof, women from Detroit, Atlanta, New Orleans, and beyond. The air buzzed with music, laughter, and purpose. Tables lined with handmade jewelry, baked goods, and financial guides. Keisha stood on stage and looked out at hundreds of faces, strong, scarred, shining. She spoke not from pride, but from gratitude. "When I started this," she said, voice thick with emotion, "I was trying to save my daughter's future. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was saving my own." Applause thundered. Somewhere in the crowd, she saw Ellis, his hands folded, watching her the way sunlight watches stained glass, not breaking through, but illuminating from within. Later that evening, after the crowd had gone, he found her sitting alone backstage, sipping water. "You know," he said, leaning on the wall beside her, "you've done something rare, Keisha. You turned betrayal into blueprint." She laughed softly. "More like bandages and budget sheets?" He smiled. "Same thing, if it helps someone heal." There was a pause, the kind that stretches not in awkwardness, but in comfort. Then Ellis said, "There's a block of abandoned row houses near my church. I've been thinking of turning them into transitional homes for women starting over. Maybe we could build it together?" She finished, surprised by her own courage. He nodded, and in that small exchange, something unspoken passed between them. Trust, fragile but real. Weeks turned into months. The project became real, a partnership between St. Luke's and Sista Savor. They called it the Renewal Block. Keisha found herself spending more time with Ellis, not in candlelight or fancy dinners, but in paint-stained afternoons, sorting donations, meeting architects. And in those simple, hard-working days, love crept in quietly, disguised as companionship. Sometimes, while reviewing blueprints, she'd glance up and find him looking at her. Not admiringly, but tenderly, as if he saw both the woman she was and the girl she used to be, the one still sitting on that stoop, hearing her world fall apart. And for once, that memory didn't sting. It felt like distance, proof of how far she'd come. But change has a way of testing what it builds. One Sunday after service, as they unveiled plans for the renewal block, a familiar face appeared at the back of the church. A woman in a dark coat, sunglasses perched high. Patrice. She looked different. Older, thinner, carrying a heaviness Keisha couldn't name. After the crowd dispersed, she approached, voice trembling. "Keisha, we need to talk." Keisha's chest tightened. The last time Patrice had used that tone, she'd lost everything. "What's wrong?" Keisha asked quietly. Patrice looked around, her eyes wet. "It's Mama's old house. They're foreclosing next week?" I tried to catch up, but Keisha closed her eyes. That house, their childhood home in Bronzeville, was where their mother had taught them everything about faith, kindness, and keeping beans in the pantry for hard days. "How much?" Keisha asked. Patrice swallowed. $50,000? That night, Keisha couldn't sleep. $50,000. A fraction of what she'd lost years ago. Yet somehow, the weight of it pressed harder. Because this time, the question wasn't about money. It was about trust. Would helping Patrice mean reopening old wounds? Or was it the final act of healing she hadn't yet faced? She stared at her notebook on the nightstand, the one that held her story, her lessons, her mantras. She flipped to the last written page. Grace is a kind of currency, too. She traced the words with her finger. And in that quiet, something inside her whispered, "Maybe it's time to spend some." Did you enjoy it? Then give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. You can also support me directly with a super thanks. The first time Dina walked into the church basement after 2 years of silence, the clatter of dishes nearly stopped. Women paused mid-sentence, forks hovered, and Keisha, standing by the coffee maker, felt her heart thud against her ribs. It was a spring morning, lilac-scented and golden with promise. Sunlight spilled through the narrow windows, catching the glass pitchers of lemonade and the framed photo of their first Sista Savor Sunday pinned to the wall. The smell of biscuits and maple butter filled the air. Keisha had been running the workshop long enough to know that every Sunday told a different kind of story. Some about debt, some about doubt, some about dreams half buried under shame. But this morning, the story walking through that door was hers. Dina looked smaller than Keisha remembered. Her once flashy curls were pulled into a simple bun, and she wore a borrowed apron from the kitchen crew. No jewelry, no perfume, just the quiet tremor of a woman walking into her own reckoning. She carried a tray of empty plates like an offering. Keisha's first instinct was to turn away, not from anger, but from memory. For 2 years, she'd trained herself not to replay that call on the stoop, not to hear the words, "Run that card real quick." She'd turned pain into purpose, betrayal into blueprint. She had built something that healed other women's wounds, but her own scar still ached beneath the skin. Yet here was Dina, eyes lowered, standing at the back of the room where redemption had a waiting list. One of the younger volunteers whispered, "That's her sister, right?" Keisha didn't answer. She simply nodded, slow and quiet, the way church folk do when they recognize the weight of what's unsaid. Then she walked over, steady, calm, apron dusted with flour, and handed Dina a plate. "Start with this one," she said softly. And that was it. No grand confrontation. No cinematic forgiveness speech. Just work, simple, humbling work. The rhythm of the day filled in the silence. Coffee poured. Women laughed. A gospel record spun on the corner player. The voice of Mahalia Jackson threading through the room like a hymn for second chances. Dina washed. Keisha served. Between them, a lifetime stretched. 2 sisters raised in the same shotgun house, divided by pride and plastic cards. At the end of brunch, when everyone else had gone, Keisha wiped the counters and noticed Dina lingering by the doorway, her hands raw from the hot water. "You want to sit?" Keisha asked, gesturing to one of the folding chairs. Dina did, and for a moment they sat in the kind of silence that holds more truth than words ever could. "I ain't ask you to forgive me," Dina said finally, her voice hoarse. I just wanted to be where you found your peace. Keisha looked at her sister. The same brown eyes, the same stubborn chin, and felt something loosen inside her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but space. And in that space, something holy was growing. She reached across the table, slow and deliberate, and placed her hand over Dina's. "Then keep showing up," she whispered. "Peace takes practice." Outside, the bells of St. Timothy's rang noon, and Keisha thought of all the Sundays that had brought her here. The stoop, the sorrow, the saving. Now there was a new story unfolding, not one about betrayal, but about restoration. By the time they locked up, Dina had already offered to come early next week to help set up the tables. Keisha didn't stop her. There were still dishes to wash and trust to earn, one plate at a time. 2 years after that first betrayal, Hyde Park had changed. Or maybe it was Keisha who had. The brownstone on Ellis Avenue still wore its age proudly. Bricks warm with memory, porch steps polished by time. But where once she sat with White Castle in hand, stunned by her sister's deceit, now she stood in the early morning light, holding a tray of sweet rolls glazed with butter and cinnamon. Across the street, a line of women curved around the block. Teachers, mothers, nurses, grandmothers, each waiting to step into the basement where something sacred had taken root. Sista Saver Sundays had become more than a brunch. It was a movement, 12 cities now, each with a chapter, each run by a woman who once sat in Keisha's circle, head bowed over bills and prayer. They shared recipes and spreadsheets, scriptures and stories. They laughed about debt, cried about doubt, and planned futures like they were building cathedrals. And at the heart of it all stood Keisha, her hands still steady from years of tending wounds, her eyes soft but unflinching. That morning, she moved through the hall as sunlight touched the folding chairs and flower vases. Each sound was a memory. The scrape of metal, the rustle of napkins, the bubbling laughter of women healing themselves through community. The rhythm was almost liturgical. Dina was already in the kitchen, tying her apron, humming a gospel tune under her breath. Her hair had gone silver at the temples, and her smile, shy, repentant, enduring, carried its own kind of grace. "Coffee's ready, Quiche," she called out. "Got the decaf for the church ladies this time?" Keisha smiled, a small thing but full of weight. "You learning?" she said. They worked side by side, moving in an unspoken rhythm only sisters share. No more explanations, no more apologies, just shared purpose. At 11 sharp, the doors opened. The crowd flooded in, and with it came the scent of butter, perfume, and possibility. A young woman approached the mic, one of Keisha's first attendees, now running the Detroit branch. She introduced Keisha with a voice full of pride. Because of her, I didn't just fix my credit, I fixed my confidence. The room broke into applause, the kind that vibrates deep in your chest. Keisha stood up slowly, smoothing her apron. She didn't need to read her notes. 2 years ago, she began, I thought saving money meant protecting myself. But what I learned, what God showed me, is that saving ain't just about dollars. It's about dignity, about saying I am worth more than what was taken from me. Her voice wavered only once, when her eyes met Dina's, standing quietly at the back, hands clasped, head bowed in humility. So today, Keisha continued, I want to remind every woman here, when your peace is stolen, when your trust is broken, don't just rebuild the fence. Replant the garden. Grow something that feeds not just you, but everybody around you. Silence fell, a tender, reverent kind. Some nodded, some cried. And then came the standing ovation, not for Keisha alone, but for every woman who turned her wounds into wisdom. Later that day, after the tables were cleared and the laughter faded into quiet hums of cleanup, Dina approached the small donation box near the door. It was the same wooden box they'd used since the first brunch. She slipped in an envelope and turned to leave, but Keisha caught her wrist. "You don't have to." Dina shook her head. "It ain't about owing. Keish, it's about offering." Inside the envelope was $67, her weekly dishwashing wages, and a note. "For the next girl who needs a start." Keisha didn't speak. She just pulled her sister into a long, trembling hug. In that embrace, years of pride and punishment melted away, leaving behind something quieter, truer. Love unadorned. Outside, the church bells began their slow, patient ringing. The same sound that had once marked endings now felt like a beginning. Keisha stepped onto the stoop, sunlight brushing her face. The city smelled of rain and bread and resilience. Somewhere a child laughed. Somewhere a new dream was taking shape, and as she locked the door behind her, she whispered, not to the past, but to the future. Let it multiply. Thank you for watching, my friends. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you again soon with another story from the heart.